You're listening to the I Love You Keep Going podcast with George Haas. For more information, please visit our website at www.mettagroup.org. That's www.mettagroup.org.
So welcome, everybody. This is I Love You Keep Going. It's Thursday, November 20th, 2025 at 7:35 p.m. Pacific time. And I was thinking today that we would talk about a topic which is safety before insight. How do you go deeper into your meditation practice? And I'm including in, of course, all the attachment work in that. How do you safely approach insight work into liberation? And I think part of the preliminaries for that is doing the attachment work. Mainly the way that we approach that is by teaching a metta vipassana approach, so that an integrated practice of the heart practice is it's a sort of short form for that. Loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity practice in combination with insight practice. And then using that platform as a preliminary practice to develop mentalizing and emotional regulation skills. And then using that platform to jump into ideal parent figure protocol as part of the preliminary practices, so that you can resolve the attachment conditioning that then frees you up to be the awesome explorer that you need to be in order to get into the deeper investigations that are offered by insight practice. That makes sense. You know, when I first started practicing in this way, I don't know, what would that be, 35 years ago or something. I had the problem that comes up with people quite often, which is I would start the insight practice, I would start the vipassana practice, but then I would wander into the shadow realms of my psyche and be completely horrified by clicking on the lights, and I would immediately click them off again. And the way I would do that was by stopping meditating. That was the choice that I really had. I remember valiantly, at least that's how it appeared to me, valiantly going to my first weekend retreat, and halfway through Saturday wanting to leave desperately. I'd made it through the couple of hours of sitting on Friday evening. And then after 3 or 4 hours of sitting in the morning, I was definitely ready to get the hell out of there. And so I went and I told the teacher that I was going to leave, and I spent 20 minutes talking to him, and I felt fine again. And so I was able to stay for the rest of the retreat. In hindsight, reflecting back on it, the disengagement in the way that Vipassana retreats are often offered, which is as a silent meditation retreat, the detachment and what I experience as a rejection of people not using the normal eye contact and, acknowledgement of politeness triggered in me a sense of being rejected, and that became painful. And a 20-minute conversation with the teacher, of course, re-regulated me. Once I was re-regulated, I could then continue on with the true retreat. The Friday evening, of course, we were still talking. It was only Saturday that was silent, and then Sunday was silent, but it only lasted until lunch, which was how I could get through to the whole thing. And then I felt amazingly accomplished at having stayed through the hardship of my first weekend Vipassana retreat. But I did understand that there was a risk on attending retreats, that the dysregulated states were really intense. And what should I do about that? Um, and then, of course, at that time, the modeling of the silent retreat was all really the only option, really, in the world that I was in. Um, I also, at that time, uh, didn't last very long in meditation groups. I would come into the group. I would be initially intoxicated with the relationships and the kindness of people, and I would be interested in the meditation. I remember taking a classic 8 week beginners or introductory to meditation class and driving down to Venice for the 7:30 class, and it lasted an hour, and then going home and attempting to sit at home. And I would sit down and I would take my stiff posture and I would sit as long as I could barely stand it. Then I would open my eyes and 3 minutes would have gone by. And then I would say, that's ridiculous. I should be able to sit longer than 3 minutes. And I would close my eyes and I would stiffen my posture and I would sit as long as I possibly could. And I would open my eyes and 2 more minutes would have gone by. Very chaotic mind, very, I think we used to call it monkey mind, rolling around. Um, and so going on the retreats and having that difficult time and doing what any self-respecting survivalist would do on a retreat, which was to routinely violate the silence restriction of the retreat and have clandestine conversations with people all over the place because I just couldn't stand the lack of reassurance that I was actually okay. Um, and I have a painful body, and so that pridefulness of wanting to sit on the cushion and be in the perfect meditation posture really is not something my body's ever been capable of doing. And the first few years of just mainly sitting in pain and so distracted by the pain, not being able to do anything else. Um, Finally accepting the humiliation that I was one of the people that would have to sit in a chair and then began to sit in a chair. uh, I think of myself very fondly now in do you know those Chinese bags? They're quite large and they're used for laundry. I had two of these big things that were like 3 by 4 feet stuffed with all the different pillows and cushions that I used, back jacks, everything I could possibly do to sit on the floor in lotus. Uh, Full lotus was the ultimate visual image of what I needed to be doing. And finally, retiring my 2 bags of cushions and just sitting in a chair. So much better in terms of the quality of the meditation. But that the first few years, just working with the pain of the body, which I, I failed to recognize was an astonishing amount of pain uh, in comparison to people who had good backs and could sit easily. And then began to have those first uh, experiences of uh, deeper meditation states, usually coming from concentration. It turns out pain is a great object of meditation because it really narrows your focus. And if you can sit with it, you get into concentrated states. Um, when I was at my first meditation class, the teacher asked, why did we come to the meditation class? And another thing I enjoy about myself is I have this sort of uh, maybe you'd call it a willful naivete, but I just in a sort of bubbly, cheerful way said, I want to be enlightened. And it produced a roar of laughter in the class, but it was not a kind laughter. It was you idiot, nobody can be enlightened uh, in the way that we practice meditation here. And that was quite disturbing to me as a concept. I thought if I'm going to take on this practice, I should be able to get to enlightenment. But why would I practice if that weren't actually the case? So I kept looking for teachers and stumbled upon the concept of a Dharma orphan. A Dharma orphan is somebody who is practicing the Dharma mainly through books because they don't have a teacher and they don't have a community. And I understood that the relational difficulty I had that made it impossible to really connect in a stable way to people in a regular way was also affecting me in my ability to connect into a meditation community. And it was evident in that cycle of rushing into a community, getting really enthusiastic about it, the relationships not going very well, and withdrawing from the community to another stretch of Dharma orphanhood, and then recognizing that I wasn't able to make progress on my own without help of some kind, and then being too chagrined to return to the community that I left and searching out new communities. So at a point where I was lost at where to go and who to talk to, a book called Buddhism in America came out, which was essentially like a whole earth catalog of Buddhist meditation teachers and centers. And I went, and each place put in a quarter page blurb of what their teaching was or what their center was like. And I went through the book and read all the ads and then landed on Vipassana Support International, which was Shinzen Young's group. And being my usual paranoid self, I went to their day-long retreats, and grilled all of the students to see whether or not he was actually a good teacher who wasn't in the habit of violating the trust of his students. And I got really good feedback over the course of about 6 months, and then started to attend retreats. He was a retreat teacher, still is, and in fact, right now, the last retreat that he's teaching is happening. So it's a long stretch. And he was astonishingly kind, which is also what I needed. The cruelty of my childhood resulted in just an outrageously unrealistic bar of the kindness that I expected from people. And if they weren't able to reach that impossible height, I didn't think I could be in relationship to them. And he was able to manage that, which was quite astonishing. And that was long before the full grid see, hear, feel structure that he's created now, that he teaches, that really does inform you so quickly and easily of how to access meditative states. And there was a community of people around that were also kind. And I was, I think, terribly lonely at the time. One of the things about having attachment disturbances is that you don't form relationships that are particularly intimate or particularly reliable. And so you're alone a lot. I found that to be one of the harder parts of life. And the community, even though it was a retreat community and a silent retreat community, you know how it is with the silent retreat community. You could sit 4 retreats a year. You could spend 2 months sitting next to somebody, but you never have a full conversation because you're in silence. And so there was some local community that formed. And I'm talking about safety in community and safety in practice, so that you can allow yourself that space. I think of it as a creative space, or an exploration space might be a way to talk about it. But you open a space that you can then turn your attention inward and begin a process of exploration. But that ability to open that space and be unguarded comes from the perception of safety in the community. If you don't have that, or safety with the teacher, if you don't have that, then there's too much attention to being protective of yourself to really allow that space to open up. Once that space opens up, then you have to go into the dragon's den. It depends, maybe. Maybe you have a lion's den, or maybe yours is filled with puppies, but mine was definitely a dragon's den. What we're really poking at, and as we begin to explore the nature of how we create reality, that's really what we're talking about, right? The conditioned response to the sensory impulses that we take in through our sense gates, that we then define and assign meaning to. But in order to explore the meaning that you're giving to reality, you have to explore the conditioning, which is the source of the meaning that you give to what's happening. And a lot of us with poor attachment conditioning are looking at harsh circumstances, and there's a lot of defense against the reality of what happened to us in order for us to preserve a navigable world. And that doesn't hold up too well if you're really diving into insight practice. And so that was the condition of that period of practice, diving into these retreats and coming into contact with the material that I was preventing myself from knowing about myself, and then withdrawing from contact with it, mainly by stopping meditating. And so that characteristic of, intense practice, consistent practice, horror, and then complete collapse of the practice, and waiting for some process of integration. And sound familiar? I don't know. Seems to be a pretty common way of practicing. I did recognize, one of the things I recognized about myself was I wasn't particularly compassionate, and in fact had almost no training in empathy or compassion. And it was startling to recognize this. My cousin was visiting me in New York. So this is during that first early period of practice. And we were walking through one of the lobbies of a skyscraper, which was, one of these corporate cathedrals of black granite and chrome and glass. And for dramatic effect, they had a 2-story escalator come down into the center of the lobby. And as we were walking through the lobby, which was otherwise empty, and the echoing sound, she was wearing heels, and I remember very distinctly the sound of the heels on the granite. A guy who was probably my age now tripped at the top of the escalator and started rolling down the escalator. My mind said, wow, That's a cool visual as he was rolling down the escalator. My cousin, on the other hand, ran across the lobby, turned off the escalator, took the escalator two steps at a time, and caught the guy in the middle. And I was thinking, wow, that was a really great thing to do. I wonder how she thought of doing it because it had never occurred to me that that would be something that you would do. And so when she got back, then the security came and carried him off and all the rest. He was injured. Uh, she came back, and I said to her, "How did you think to do that? I mean, how did you know how to turn off the escalator?" And she said, "I didn't think about it. I just did it." And so I had this very uh, interesting recognition of how differently we were conditioned in the world, that her mind would automatically propel her across the lobby and she would take that risk without even thinking about it. She would figure out how to turn off the escalator. There was, of course, an emergency switch that she just hit on the way up, but uh, who would have thought to do that? It certainly wouldn't have occurred to me. That was the thing. I knew and kept track of that as this is a deficit that I need to fix in some way. Well, I don't know if you ever tried to fix it. It's not so easy. But as I was practicing I had by this time moved to LA. The Art of Loving Kindness came out of Sharon Salzberg book. I think it was '94 or something like that. And so I started to practice it. Not much happened. I think when you begin to practice loving kindness, depending on what the instructions are, if you're on the dismissing side of things, which I was, there's a suppression of emotion, so you don't have a lot of access to it. And so even in the wet metta practices where you're attempting to generate these positive emotional states, I didn't feel that much. It was hard to get something to happen. Um, and I I remember practicing and going through all the exercises. I was really affected by the perception that there would be such a profound deficit of character as I saw it, uh, and for a few months, I think I went slowly through the book, practicing, and then I was on the telephone with someone. I was talking to them, and they were describing something that happened to them, and I suddenly had this compassionate response, this loving kindness response, which was fully embodied emotion. It was mind blowing. And I literally sat down where I was standing because it was so different than what my normal experience of life was. So quite transformative. When I discovered that there was a combined practice of metta vipassana, I was immediately drawn to it. One of the things that you can do in a combined practice of metta vipassana is you can use the vipassana side to explore uh, the loving kindness side, although I didn't find so much available to me in terms of instruction around the combination of the two. It was always a segregated practice of loving kindness and a segregated practice of vipassana. When I started to teach meditation, we initially taught vipassana only silent meditation style retreats in that typical way. And what you notice on the teacher side of retreats is that first 2 or 3 days of the retreat, you have a lot of people that are having a lot of problems with the disconnection and the reassurance that they're used to. And a lot of people want to leave the retreat in the early part of the retreat because they're having trouble emotionally regulating themselves in silence. I'm not sure why it's such a standard practice in the Vipassana world to have silent retreats. When I began to inquire as to why we were doing that, it wasn't adequately explained. It was modeled on Asian monastic models of practice, but we were so far away from any realistic monastic practice on retreat or any cultural the cultural responses in Asia not being relevant here. Really, mainly that in the beginning, of course. In the East, the identification is with the family unit, but it's not that way in the West. We're solidly identified with ourselves and have some identification with the family system. But for a lot of us, particularly the people who find their way into meditation circles, aren't so connected there. So those early practices of silence and those early practices of disconnection, which are really in the East meant to point you to yourself outside of the context of the family union, I think for a lot of us in the West become alienating practices where we feel too separate, too disconnected. And the insight practice, going in and discovering these aspects of ourselves that we have defended so valiantly, there's that word again, valiantly defended against knowing anything about ourselves because our opinion of ourselves is so low. And then recoiling in horror and rushing away from the practice until, of course, the suffering returns, and then returning to the practice because we need to do something about the suffering, that sort of swing back and forth. When I got interested in this metta vipassana way of practicing and went out to Miramar and studied with Sayadaw Indika, in particular the metta jhana form, which is these entering into these high concentration states using the view or the mindset of loving kindness as the object of meditation. It really solidified the idea that we should be entering into retreat practice with a few days at the beginning, or half the retreat is what we used to do, would be loving kindness practice. So you really settle into this relationship with yourself, which is this kindness towards self, this compassionate in the way that we can have self-compassion toward ourselves in opening to these aspects of ourselves that are hard to hold. We really found that there was no distress in the first few days of the retreat. There was no disconnection in the first few days of the retreat. Then people settled into these positive experiences of themselves, which then allowed them to open the insight side and explore conditioning without that, without the trouble that we often had. So I think that from the safety perspective, that model of metta vipassana, where we spend a few days settling into an open, kind relationship with ourselves, is a wonderful prerequisite then to pushing into the insight side. I do think also in that experience, it became evident that a lot of us have attachment conditioning, which we need to repair. And that actually the repairing of that attachment conditioning opens up our capacity to explore in a way that we have been in some ways restricted at. And that capacity to explore is essential to the deep investigations that are open in the meditation paths. I've said this part of the story quite a lot, so you may have heard it before, but 25 years ago, Shinzen asked his senior students at the time to begin to teach as a way of paying back his having taught us. So I started to teach. There was a place in Santa Monica called the Santa Monica Zen Center. And I initially began to teach Shinzen's material, and I was attempting to teach it in great fidelity to the way that he taught it. But the feedback that I got from people was, if we wanted to sit with Shinzen, we just go sit with Shinzen. We want to sit with you, but we don't want you to give us your impression of Shinzen. We want an authentic expression of you and your understanding of what's going on. And in particular, one of the students said, "You used to be the angriest person I had ever met, and you're not angry anymore. It would really be useful to me if you could tell me how you did that." And so I began to teach a class called Overcoming Anger. And that went pretty well, and I taught it a few times. And then somebody came up to me and said, anger really isn't my issue. Fear is my issue. Could you teach a class on fear? And so I started to teach a class called Overcoming Fear in addition to my class of Overcoming Anger. I would alternate them. And then somebody came and said, anger and fear aren't my issue. Sadness is my issue. Could you teach a class on sadness? So I started to teach a class called Overcoming Sadness, which I would alternate with Overcoming Anger and Overcoming Fear. 8-week classes. And then somebody came up to me and said, anger, fear, and sadness is not my issue. Shame is my issue. Could you teach a class on shame? And then the light bulb went off above my head. And I thought, I know, I'll teach a class called Overcoming Difficult Emotions. And so I started to teach a class called Overcoming Difficult Emotions. And actually, it was a big class because everybody came to it instead of just the slices of the emotional pie. And then a student came up to me and said, George, it isn't the difficult emotions that are the problem in my life. It's the relationships that cause the difficult emotions that are the problem in my life. At which point I thought, I will begin to teach about attachment, because my personal practice had been working with my attachment conditioning. How did I end up with an interest in teaching attachment conditioning in the late 90s in Los Angeles might be a question. And a friend of mine worked at the Neuropsychiatric Institute at UCLA and recorded a lecture that Alan Shore had given on disorganized attachment, which she then copied to a CD, which she gave me. She said, essentially, this reminds me of you. You should listen to it. And so I popped the CD of Alan Shore talking about disorganized attachment. And in 10 minutes, he described the whole cycle of my life, which repeated itself over and over again, which was a lot of beginnings, some of them even brilliant, a few middles, but no finishes. And then he described the origin of that cycle, which was embedded in attachment theory. And I thought, this is it. This is the actual model that explains everything to me in a way that seems clear. And so I ran around looking for some kind of psychotherapy which was attachment focused. I can tell you that 30 years ago in Los Angeles, there was not a single therapist who was offering attachment-focused therapy, and almost no one who had heard of it as a concept. So it was just emerging in the zeitgeist. But I thought, listening to it and getting what material I could read on it, if you've not read Alan Shore, it is dry and dense, hard to read. It was an act of will that got me through those books. And I like to read difficult things. uh, I began to suspect that attachment conditioning would be susceptible to meditation practice. And so I began to develop these meditation strategies that I thought I could use to crack my attachment conditioning because I wanted to have connection to people that felt reliable and close. I wanted to feel safe in revealing myself, which was always hard to do. And I was tired of being so alone in the world. Uh, when you have, I had complexly disorganized attachment, it really feels a lot of the time like you have your nose pressed against the glass and you're looking into a room of people that are connecting and engaging each other and having fun and enjoying each other. And you can't crack the code of it. So you would know how to do it for yourself. Uh, and I wanted to get through the door. But when the student said, it's not the difficult emotions that are the problem for me, it's the relationships that I can't figure out and I can't manage. I um, said, all right, I'll teach these techniques that I've been developing for myself and see if that's helpful to people. And so I started to teach a class called The Meaningful Life, I think. Hesh, did you came to that one long, long ago. Um, I had the idea that it was going to take some effort to change your attachment strategy. So I made the classes 10 months long instead of 8 weeks. I thought, a 10-month class, I'll teach all of this stuff, I'll teach these techniques. And at the end of the class, everyone will have secure attachment and it'll be fantastic. Well, that didn't pan out really. I noticed after teaching the class for 5 years that while it was very helpful to people, uh, didn't have that big of an effect on people's attachment. It had a big effect on their awareness, and they could see the patterns that they were engaging in, that they weren't free of the patterns. So we looked around for uh, what we might use to help that. And I came across Dan Brown's work and in dialogue with him, understood that the addition of ideal parent figure protocol would be useful. Christian?
George, that's the worst thing you could have done to those people. You gave them all the awareness without the tool.
I'm still suffering. Anyway, I worked with Dan for several years in integrating the ideal parent figure into the work. And one of the things about ideal parent figure, which I really appreciate, and this is again coming back to this idea of safety, um, is that it's a non-direct trauma reprocessing approach. I had a lot of trauma in my life, and in the 90s, the main idea of trauma was a kind of direct trauma reprocessing approach, a kind of exposure therapy, but lighter than direct exposure therapy. And I went for 4 sessions a week. So I'd go from 3 to 5 on a Tuesday and from 9 to 11 on a Wednesday. So we could open it up and I could get through the night and then we could close it up at the end of the second day. But it really didn't close up so well and I didn't function so well. And it was really a long 3 years of a cycle that not much else happened except for the trauma reprocessing. And I was when I began to do the ideal parent figure stuff, the indirect trauma reprocessing approach did not interrupt the flow of my week the way that the other did. And I ended up being able to process the stuff that was unprocessable in the other approach. And it was very clear to me that even though it was the standard of treatment at the time, was not a good approach for dealing with it, and that the indirect approach is much better, much safer, and so it fit really well into this frame of safe practice, if you will. And so a couple of years, 2.5 years of doing ideal parent figure, I went from complexly disorganized, which was what my first AAI was, to earn secure in my second AAI, which was a wonderful thing. But the main thing about that is that it completely transforms this process of making conceptual reality from what you perceive. The paranoia and the fearfulness of a disorganized person was relieved. I often talk about writing my book, The Lower Manhattan Dormitory Effect, which took 12 years to write, mainly because it was so anxiety producing to work on it. So I'd work on it as much as I could, and then the anxiety would get too great, and then I would stop working on it. The pattern of engagement of disorganized people, right? Rush in, work feverishly as hard as you can because you know the window is going to be short, trying to get as much to happen as possible, get into the middle where it gets troubling, and then just having to bail because the anxiety is so great you can't bear it. Finishing it. And then following the earning of security, writing the next book, Punch Outs, in 2 years because there was no anxiety about it. And also now working on the book I'm working on now, there's no anxiety about the writing of the book, so that space that I was talking about that opens, where you can play, where you can create, is there. That sense of that attachment container that then protects that childlike play that then has to happen so that you can engage in finding the meaning that you need to find in life. There it is, which comes from that security. Hence, our collection of strategies that we talk about in order to do the preliminary practice of resolving the unresolved childhood conflicts in your conditioning so that you can successfully come into this place where that space for creative play opens, and you can discover what you need to know. And it's very intuitive, it's very fluid. And then if you want to, you can turn your attention to the deep meditation insights that are available and really run a long way down that path as well, which I think is also a good idea. In fact, actually, probably the idea behind all of this is to get to the place where you can see yourself and the world and how you make it in each moment, so that you can make it in a way that actually is who you are. And so it's this the freedom to become who it is that you are. Christian?
George, I'm curious. This might be a longer answer, but I'm curious because you had been meditating so long before you did the attachment work. What kind of effect you saw doing the attachment work had on your meditation practice?
I would say that the early part of the meditation practice was really just a practical way of managing anxiety. That's what it was. And there was in some sense, also a helplessness that came from it, because I could see very clearly the patterns of reaction that I had, but I couldn't inhibit or stop them. I could correct, I could repair quicker. I could see that often I could see the distortion in my thinking and not make a fatal action in a relationship. Um, but I didn't stop having them. And I didn't have a sense of safety, really. I was always, as disorganized people uh, do, preparing to be abandoned and having to get on alone. Um, I never really counted on anybody in that way. Um, with the advent of the uh, ideal parent figure and the shift in that perception, the sense of people's reliability no longer became frightening. I just uh, relied on them, which is the change. And in that relying on them, and as you well know, nobody is perfect. So there's even that space for people to be imperfect, opened this uh, uh, space. I don't know what to call it, a space, this the place where the undefended mind can creatively puzzle things. And in that, then opening really for the such a strong sense of the sacredness of everything that was completely absent from the earlier practice. And then really wandering around most of the time with this astonishment at the sacredness of life and the astonishment at the beauty of the people that I encounter as I go along, which was also pretty much absent earlier, which I also don't think would have been available had I not been able to pursue the attachment work. After the trauma reprocessing that I did in the psychotherapeutic setting, I was able to stabilize and keep a job, for instance. The first time, really, I was able to keep a job. Now, this would put me in my early 50s. I was finally able to keep a job that didn't blow up because the relationships I got soured. But it was a job way below what I might have been capable of doing had I started out earlier, or if I had been able to develop myself career-wise. That when you start out in your 50s being employable, what you're really noticing is that everybody your age is winding up their employment. They're not striving to make their way. And so I had that sense of it. I had a sales job, and I was in-home sales, so you're driving around. And so in order to entertain myself with that, I bought an old camera and I threw it in my trunk, an old 4x5 film camera. And I would take pictures in different places that I went because I found, well, still being quite harsh with myself, I demanded of myself that I do something because I thought that my station where I had managed to get to was not valuable. There was still a lot of drivenness, and the goal that I had set for myself was that I would make 6 pictures a month. I would finish 6 photographs a month, which was actually really hard to do. Um, so it gives you a level of where I was at. The Anyway, I'm my mother was a photographer, and some of my earliest memories are really hanging out in the darkroom with mom, and I loved that. And so it was. It, when you make meaning, of course, so you're attaching this memory thread to this activity that you have now, and it is the thing that is happening now, but it's also one of the versions of my mother that actually was valuable to me. And so there's that merging of it, which means the the activity of the present moment has that richness of your whole life in it, which is actually part of the way that things become meaningful. They're resonant of it. I think you play the violin, don't you? It probably has that richness of meaning from the time that you've engaged in it.
It also has uh the sort of traumatic introjection of getting it from my mom and then finding the meaning of it as an
Yeah,
adult.
which is essentially what the photography for me was, that similar salvaging of something in the early life that you can carry through has meaning. Um, Part of it also, I think, is coming to terms with what wasn't developed, that perhaps there was the potential for, but didn't happen because of the conditions of childhood. I think as long as we hold on to that and fail to grieve it, there's this devaluing of what is actually available to us now that we could do, because it isn't what might have been, and we can idealize the shit out of what might have been. If you could bring it down to just there may have been potential and maybe a possibility there, but because it was not pursued, it isn't what happened. And we do really have to inhabit this eternity of the present moment and gather up what is here now and make this uh, meaningful life out of what it is that we have to make it out of, not what was lost, which is already lost, or what we didn't do. Uh, and that also is, if you can manage it, greatly relieving, really lightening of things, and rich. It leads to a richness of life. You know the old childhood song, um, "Nobody likes me, everybody hates me. I'm going to go eat worms." Do you know that one? That if I can't have the idealized version, I'm not going to take anything, which leads to just an endless deprivation. Right? It's lost already. No need to pay attention to it. What's here? What's available now? Take that. Make a rich and beautiful life from that, and it will be enough. It doesn't have to be what might have been. And move in this practice. And if you work with people, I think it's important to have a meditation teacher, a person to help you through all of this. If you particularly if you have attachment work to do or some kind of traumatic experiences early, it's hard to avoid people that are sensitive to the safety of this, and have an understanding of it, and a pathway that they can describe to you that will take you there, in a container that allows that uh, freedom of having to constantly attend to the environment, so that you can turn inward and allow that creative space to open up, so that you can engage in solving those conflicts. Anyway, what do you say we do a little practice? What would you like to do? Loving kindness, Vipassana, uh, IPF, loving kindness. All right.
You know me, I'm very intimidated by the ideal parent now until
Oh,
I get through it a little bit more. So I go for loving kindness.
All right. 2 for loving kindness. What else? Going once, going twice.
I want IPF, but I'll go with the flow.
Sold to loving kindness. Go ahead and settle in. Okay. Let go of the meditation. Bum, bum, bum. How's that? So let's see here. Next week, we're doing our monthly lunchtime meet, which is on Tuesday the 25th from 1 till 2:15. Actually, this I'm talking about um, the using ideal parent figure protocol in a professional setting. On Friday, the 28th, the day after Thanksgiving, we're having Kaleidoscope, our monthly gathering at 11 a.m. until 12:30. And then let's see here. Our monthly meeting in December, our monthly lunch meeting in December is on the 16th of December. And then Kaleidoscope is on the 26th of December, the day after Christmas. And then starting on the week of the 29th of December through the 2nd of January, we're having a virtual retreat. Take a look at that. And then on the 10th of January next year, we're starting a meditation and attachment level 1 class. So that's essentially what's coming up. Thanksgiving, Christmas, and New Year's are on Thursday, so we won't be meeting for I Love You, Keep Going on those days. But I do hope that you have a good holiday experience.
Well, it's not a holiday in Canada. I won't be eating turkey. You guys all,
Neither
all have
will
good
I.
yeah. Or tofurkey.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No, it won't be. So we'll miss you. And
Yeah. Well, Thanksgiving to you all. Have a
yes,
good
indeed.
Thanksgiving.
You've already had yours.
Yeah, it's true. And it's only another month till Christmas turkey. So I
Right.
don't know. Yeah. Or tofurkey.
Everybody all right? I really appreciate your practice. I offer the teaching freely, but I do hope if you're resourced and you can, you'll make a donation. There's a link on the website that helps support me and also the work Mettagroup is doing. Ash?
Yeah, I wanted to ask about the lunch meet. Is that in person? No.
No. It's virtual. Everything is virtual.
Okay. Is that like an open thing like the like this class?
No, you have to register for it.
Okay. All right, I'll look for it on the site.
Okay, good. All right, everybody. Good to see you. See you soon. Well, a couple of weeks. Bye.